views on solar, and it happened quicker than expected. So we'll see. I think, as I said before, I think where additive comes in is how do I make replicable, cheaper production of components which go into anything, right? And in our sense, where we use it as such is for, as I said before, for smaller components, which play either into, believe it or not, an engine for an airplane, which may go into a nacelle of a wind turbine, which may go into printing one day panels, solar PV panels. So all of that, I think, is real and is happening today. I think the other thing that comes in is, and where we use it is, we have so-called what we call mobile factories. Where this helps us is clearly on the nature of and on the issue of local content rules. So bringing a mobile factory, bringing a bit of a container with a few, so to speak, printers in it, which help us to produce some of the content which is required locally, that clearly helps us, and we do that today in certain countries where we're not present and need local content.
So that's fascinating, because I was going to ask, had you not brought that up, I was going to ask whether the trends towards advanced manufacturing, does that mean that manufacturing will reconcentrate back in the developed world? Or will it democratize manufacturing and allow manufacturing to go not just into China, but into another sort of another wave of countries, of developing world countries, and enable them to compete?
So I see that as a possibility. I think with 3D printing, with additive, with advanced manufacturing, you can do exactly that. So take production from previous maybe high-cost countries and go elsewhere, not just for the sake of doing low-cost production, but simply also to bring employment to certain regions. So I see that. We ourselves have, as I said, have put out some what we call mobile factories in, well, I don't know if per IFC definition those are developing countries, but certainly not Western European or US or in fact China, but more in regions where one may call them developed regions. And as I said, we see also an advantage on 3D printing and advanced manufacturing and additive on the cycle time, right? If you can take out the shipment time, if you can take out costs which are associated around duties, which are associated around shipment, it also brings a cheaper product, in fact, to your customer at the end of the day.
Very good. Yeah, I was at a DHL had a conference in Berlin a week or so ago, and there was an example. Actually, it was a GE example of a component that had 300 separate parts sourced from 20 countries, was being replaced by one printed part. So of course, DHL was very upset about this, because think of how far, very many fewer shipments.
Yeah.
But I love the idea of local content. So what will happen is the big helicopter will come, put in a container with a printer, you'll print it, probably Felix will provide the energy source, the energy supply. You'll print your things locally and then pick up the container and disappear with it. Is that really going to be?
Or fly it elsewhere.
Or fly it to the next country to, yeah. I'm not sure, I mean, I'm not a big fan of local content rules, so that wouldn't bother me if that was the solution. But is that realistic? Is that within the spirit of local content stipulations?
Well, first of all, I think I join you on not being a big fan on local content rules. I don't know or looking at how they're exercised today and how the spirit of those rules is lived today. I don't think they're lived by today in any case, right? I think the initial idea is to bring employment to the regions where that project is executed, but there are today already many ways around. Well, not around local content rules, but let me put it this way, how to interpret them and how to execute on those local content rules. I'm not a big fan. I wish regulation would be a bit more real in that regard, and rethink about whether those rules necessarily really still fulfill their initial spirit. I think there's room for improvement on that regard, but regulation is, as I said before, it is what it is.
So in the green room earlier, I challenged our panelists to see if any of them had any example where local content rules had actually led to the creation of a sustainably competitive sector. in their experience anywhere in the world. And unless any of them have thought of anything since then, the answer was essentially no. But that raises a different question. It raises the question then of what does work in terms of, and Fatih, you have you've created manufacturing operations in a number of countries. You listed a few of them. So what makes those countries attractive for you if local content rules do not?
The first, we would like to work in the respect to the regulation. Let me give you one example. In Turkey, we worked with a PPP project with the UNDP and the Global Environmental Facility, and the partners are the Ministry of the Energy and the Ministry of the Industry, and we worked for the 5 years, and we implemented the energy efficiency regulation for all the white goods in the Turkey. We got a know-how on this topic, and we decided to transfer this know-how the South Africa. We bought the DeFi company in South Africa 2011, and during the last 5 years, we, after implementing the energy efficiency in product and the production, and taking care of the communication with the ministries in the South Africa, we reached the 50–60% of the energy efficiency in the products. And I mean, by using this example, taking care, implementing the regulation and the standards are extremely important.
Right. That's a great example of a regulatory, in a sense, framework that you then met in Turkey that gave you the capability to operate in a further market.
It is also important to avoid the commodity market. I mean, if you increase the efficiency of the products, and you can
differentiate.
Yes,
right.
Exactly.
Very good. Antonio, if we talk, sticking with the theme of internationalizing things that work, I suppose the flip side, the risk with that is that companies might go to places where there isn't the regulatory control, there isn't the circularity, there aren't the rules on recycling, on energy efficiency. Is that a real risk? Is that something you're working on? So regulatory dumping,
I would look at it more as an opportunity. I think that, as I said at the beginning, there's a lot of value embedded in products where perhaps the infrastructure might not be in place in different markets to capture that value. So I suppose it is about going into partnerships to really set up those systems to be able to then actually capture that value. And you can look at that from various perspectives. If we talk about the circular economy, we can talk about kind of high-tech digitization, some of these opportunities around sort of service-based business models, using digital technology to kind of, call a taxi, so on and so forth, to access those underutilized markets. I think those are realities around the world. That's not, those have applications, I think, in most countries around the world today. So there is that kind of step change. But there's also the side of the circular economy, which is very much about, basic management of resources. And indeed, there are quite a lot of countries around the world who don't necessarily have basic waste management infrastructure, systems in place, regulations in place. And I think, just again, that's where you really do, I think, as both the businesses who are producing products, for example, that end up in global markets, as well as kind of governments and investors to work together to set up those systems, because it is an entire system. It's not one individual component. So I think there's a huge opportunity there, but it does require a bit that public-private collaboration, but also the investors to be part of that collaboration to help invest in that overall chain of activity. And again, I come to opportunity because once that's in place, there is a lot of economic evidence that shows that there's an incredible value to those assets and resources.
Yeah, I guess I was probing because I think you're right that all of the kind of shared economy, seems to be going pretty much at the same speed all around the world. And the great examples of mobile payments in Africa and competitors in pretty much every country. There are Uber competitors. If it's not one of the majors, it'll be a local player. My worry is about on the physical side of things, the factories, the manufacturing, whether there's a risk that activity will migrate to the countries, or that the developing countries will not get the additive manufacturing, the differentiated, really advanced stuff. What they'll get is older, because traditionally developing countries have had older models manufactured less efficiently and have sort of been stuck with that in a sense. And is that a risk you worry about?
I mean, I suppose there's two sides to that. There's sort of product refurbishment and kind of very high grade, high cost products that can and should be refurbished at the same standard level and standardized as such, that can have, I think, applications, again, globally, not just in developed as well as developing economies. And there are there are regulations in place that actually prevent those, very high grade materials from moving around the world, or sort of refurbished products moving around the world because of fears of anti-dumping. And I think that is a very real fear in terms of not letting that happen. But I think the other reality is there is actually a lot of innovation happening in kind of